Hello and good evening, everyone. It's illumignostic, and I've got some mind-blowing information for you tonight. It's one of the few metaphysical ideas that I would say is a near certainty. And of course, anytime you're dealing with any kind of metaphysical ideas, there's always an element of having to make certain assumptions in order to move forward with the thinking. So, bearing that in mind, let's start off by talking about something that I read in the Zohar when we were doing a Kabbalah stream the other day. And this is something that I've done since I was a child. It just intuitively made sense to me, but it sort of reminded me of this idea right, within days of watching this Infinity documentary on Netflix. And so these two things combined, and what I'm going to tell you basically is what was implied in that documentary in Infinity, which you all should watch for sure. What's going on, Northern Light? So anyways, the Zohar says that the only thing that we can know about the Creator is what we can observe in the creation, because it's basically a reflection. And that's why we shouldn't make conjecture that isn't based on observation of natural law and the manifestations of the created universe. And that's kind of how I've always thought, that the way to learn about the universe is to observe natural systems. For example, when you see a rule that is manifest in every single system you can find, then you know that you have found one of these like absolute laws of creation, right? And so, for example, what comes up must come down. There's a million ways to say it, but it applies to a human, a civilization, a tree. Everything is transient. You can put it that way. There are lots of different ways to say it, but no matter what you're talking about, it's always true. And so it's that kind of observation-based extrapolation of ideas, and then you sort of can transfer them to the arena of spirituality. And what's going on, Fish? So in this particular case, we're talking about infinity, which is a really daunting subject, but and it's one of our assumptions as well, that the universe is infinite. And we're not talking about the matter in the universe. It's not infinite. It's certainly going to eventually, the stars run out of fuel. Everything collapses in on itself. The light consumes itself, and one of two things is almost certainly going to happen. There's one version of this called quantum loop theory, where the balance of the universe and the matter in it and the vacuum and all of these elements, basically the process of expansion reverses and it becomes contraction. So there's two processes in the universe, systole and diastole, right? Expansion and contraction. And right now we're in an expanding phase, and eventually it'll reach a certain point where it'll collapse back in on itself. And that will condense all of the energy in the universe to this tiny little infinitesimal point that we think of as the singularity or the Big Bang. And then it starts over again. And the thing is that once that energy was condensed, as it was in the last Big Bang, every single aspect of it would be absolutely identical to the last time. And so, and there are, there's a school of physics around this at this point, this quantum loop theory. And so it's basically the idea of the phoenix, that it just recycles itself and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. But there is a version of this that is even maybe a little bit more compelling and more likely and more interesting. And it basically establishes with 100% certainty that you guys will watch this stream, you will live this life and every moment of it over and over and over and over for all of infinity. There will be an infinite number of variations. And we're not talking about multiverse here. We're not talking about everything happening all at once. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us by joining the Patreon, where you get free gear and like t-shirts and stuff. And you can join our secret streams where we chew through Masonic secrets and whatnot. But so here's the deal. If you have, I'm going to use the same example from the documentary, the Netflix documentary on infinity. If you have a box that is absolutely sealed, so nothing can escape, period, end of story. Not light, photons, not atoms, nothing. Nothing's going anywhere. And you have an apple that's sealed into this box, and it's an infinite box. So the box will have this apple in it for infinity. And so after maybe, a week or two, it'll start to rot and decompose and shrivel up. And then after a year, it'll be almost unrecognizable. And then after, 100 years, it'll be a little pile of dust. But then after maybe, say, 1 billion years, 2 billion years, it'll actually break down. The chemical energy will escape. The photons will free themselves from the bondage of matter, and they will start to circulate around this box. After trillions and trillions more years, or just some astronomically huge number, those elements or particles will rearrange themselves, and they'll take some other form, and they will cycle through every single form that is possible for them to take over an infinite period of time, including at some point the same apple that you put in that box will reappear in that box. And there is no question about this. So if the universe ages to a certain point and all the stars run out of fuel, there's no life anywhere, the last thought is thought, the last breath is breathed, right? The stars burn out. Eventually, the same thing that happened to that apple is going to happen in the universe at large. And so all of the light will escape from its prison of matter, and it will reconfigure itself in every possible permutation for all of infinity, and this will repeat forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And, I started thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, so, there is no reason to assume that the void of space would ever go anywhere. It can't burn out. It can't burn up. It's never going anywhere. So that's basically the deal. It just hit me that I don't know if you can wrap your head around this, but it is an almost absolute certainty, just based on the single assumption that space will exist for infinity, that we will do what we're doing right now, this moment that we're sharing right in this moment, will happen again, again, and 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 again. And the thing is, though, every other different possible permutation of it will also happen over and over and over and over. So there will be variation, there will be variety. Here's the real catcher, though. You may not have any awareness of these other permutations. At the same time, though, when we die, the time that lapses between our death and our rebirth in this exact life, even if it's almost an infinite time in the future, we will experience only the moment of death, 3 minutes of brain activity, and then being born again to the same mom in the same hospital at the same time, all completely identical. So that's basically it. I mean, that's the long and short of it. This doesn't necessarily have to be a long stream because it's a simple thing to understand. But it, and I hope that it represents some kind of progress. It's kind of a fundamental assumption of most thinking people that humanity is going somewhere, or that not humanity, but the processes of the universe are going somewhere. And I at least like to think that it's a sort of evolution. And so if spirituality is advancing, we should be able to come up with new ideas that are actually valid. You know what I mean? Greater truths than we have ever encountered in the past. And this concept of observing the natural world and making extrapolations from it to tell us about, life after death and whatever the creator might be and all of these things, that should also be advancing. And this is a style and a technique that has existed since the ancient mysteries in Greece and Yeah, Luciferian Jesus lover. I think with absolute certainty you are at some point. The thing is, with this idea, you could actually. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't mean that only this life is going to happen over and over again for all of eternity. You could possibly cycle from your point of view through the point of views of every other human being that's ever lived, every frog, every toad, every, you know what I mean, from every possible perspective. Because if we have infinite time, then every possible variation of the infinite universe would occur. So, but the thing that I think we can be the most certain about, because, you know, if you just think about how at the moment where the process reaches its nadir, I guess, its apex, the moment where it reverses, all of the conditions are going to be completely identical to the last time it happened. And then when the energy is again compressed into, you know, a point as small as that precipitated the Big Bang, all of the conditions will be exactly the same. The only reason that I have any hope for variation in this process is that one of the absolute rules or absolute laws is that there is an exception to every rule. And you can see this in physics when you do an experiment over and over and over again. When you're working with particle accelerators and whatnot, you can do your experiments with atomic clocks that count like quadrillionths of a nanosecond. And so it's possible to repeat an experiment a trillion times because it only takes a second. And so what you'll observe doing this is that every, like, you know, billion or so times, and it's apparently random, although nothing is random. I'm going to put a link to an equation that establishes that even a dripping sink is not random. There's nothing random in the universe. And there's an equation that can tell you how populations of rabbits will fluctuate over time, and just anything that you apply it to. There's nothing random in the universe. That kind of got me off of my track, though. Yeah, and of course, you know, this could explain deja vu very nicely. And, you know, for myself, I've had experiences where I have known a tremendous amount about another person's life, and I knew all of his books before I ever read them, to the point where I would, like, read them to my girlfriend, and I would stop and start explaining, and then I would look back in the book, and it would be exactly the next paragraph. And there was a lot of other stuff. I mean, it was just really, really crazy experience. But you know, it's an alternative to the idea that we're reincarnated when this happens, because if we just experience it over and over and over and over and over again, and perhaps there's something like the 0 point field that's making a record, or, you know, some of us have just better access to the subconscious, which has you know, a window into the infinite, into the greater mind, the universal mind. You know, there's another variation of this that's important to consider as well. There's a physicist who is a lady. She's German. And she was asked this question about the afterlife, and she pointed out that time is actually not linear in the way that we experience it. And that's what, you know, experimental data shows, even though we can never directly observe that. Well, actually, we have now. Excuse me. There has been an experiment where particles were sent 2 seconds back in time. So we have established that, and the reason that's possible is that the past still exists. And so her answer to this question was that we all exist in all of the time periods we ever lived in. You know, every second of our life always exists somewhere. So that was an interesting thought too, that you could very well just get sent back to the beginning, in that way. But I think this reality that the universe eventually loses its cohesion, and the light and particles are freed again, and then they're going to reassemble themselves in every possible configuration for infinity, guarantees us almost, because we can't be certain that the universe is infinite. So there's that variable, but But yeah, we can be pretty certain that this happens, that we live this life over and over and over. Okay, so I don't think I finished one of the ideas that I started fleshing out here, and that was that there is a variation in these experiments, right? On a subatomic level, they do these things, and if you smash a quark into a muon, at a certain velocity, you always get a certain number of the other weird particles, whatever they are. And so, but then once you won't, you'll get some other result. And so that suggests to me that, because there is this element of chaos that is integrated into the operating system, when this universe cycles through on this quantum loop, there will be variations. What I'm wondering, though, is that if they're going to be so minute that they don't really add up to much in terms of change. But I think it's likely that they do, because when you have, billions and billions of elements of constituent parts in a system like the human body, we have, I don't know how many cells, but it is a gargantuan number. And so if you are actually able to calculate the number of subatomic particles in the entire body, it's a stupefying number, right? And then when you consider that the variations, that the chaos in the system, right, this exception to every rule, when you multiply that by how many constituent parts there are in the human body, then you come up with a macro level of freedom of movement. So there is a sort of pathway to finding actual free will and some leeway in the deterministic system that allows us to live, really. I've always thought it was about 50-50. They say that 80% or 90% almost, maybe even I think some estimates are 98% of what we do and say and think is automatic, that it's the subconscious, and only 2% of our behavior is actually free will. I think it probably varies considerably from person to person. I think that's what awareness is when we talk about expanding our consciousness and developing a higher level of awareness. What we're really talking about is metacognition and freedom from the rule of the subconscious. So, yep, that's pretty much the entire story. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. It's an interesting thought. It's a little bit disconcerting to think that we're doomed to this repetition for all of eternity. But I think we've also, it's really important for us to take note of the fact that we seem to have made some sort of reached a turning point where even the most advanced physicists on Earth are suddenly not exactly atheists. I don't think you're going to find too many religious people amongst them. But again, that Netflix documentary about infinity, one of these physicists said, I don't believe in God, but to say that there's no kind of intelligence inherent in the system, or that there's no spirit or something like God, and he's like, I do believe that there is that. And so, I think it's important to take note of the fact that we have this attitude, this narrative, mostly on the left, I guess, that if you have even an openness to the idea that there could be some sort of greater overmind in the universe, that you're an idiot. I mean, that's basically the consensus of like the atheist liberal demographic, right? And it's not true. Even Neil deGrasse Tyson calls himself an agnostic. So, yeah, man. So that is it, I guess. I don't have anything else to say about this. If you just jumped on and you want to hear this lofty declaration that I've made, then you can go back and watch it again. So I want to thank everyone for joining me for the stream, and I want to encourage you guys to come and see me in July or November. We've decided to move to Yasuni probably for for the last round, and that is the most biologically diverse place on Earth. It's going to be beyond epic, like the craziest experience ever possible on this planet, really. I mean, there's gigantic waterfalls. There are pink river dolphins, anaconda, giant anaconda, 18 species of monkeys, the whole jungle. And that's why we're going, because I was thinking, if we're only going to be in the jungle for some other short period, then we might as well go to the most epic part of it and really, where the animals are protected, for one thing. We still have some wildlife here, but it's nothing like you would have in a place like Yasuni, where there's still plenty of jaguar everywhere, and ocelot, all the big cats are around, and all of the monkeys and all of the birds, and at least most of them. So yeah, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and we'll see you again very soon.